Hello, I'm doing a book review, and the book I want to review is Batman 89. Now, Batman 89 is a limited comic book series first published in single magazine form by DC Comics between 2021 and 2022, and this series, of course, features the character of Batman, originally created by Bob Kane and Bill Finger. Now, this hardcover collects the first 6 issues of Batman 89, however, the series was continued after this. Now, this serves as a sequel to the 1989 Tim Burton Batman film, as well as Batman Returns. However, it completely ignores the continuity of Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. Granted, the continuity between the Tim Burton Batman films and the Joel Schumacher films was loose to say the least. Probably the most glaring continuity error is the fact that in the first movie, Harvey Dent was played by Billy D. Williams, a black actor, but then in Batman Forever, which supposedly is in the same continuity, Harvey Dent is inexplicably played by Tommy Lee Jones, a white guy. Now, DC has tried to explain that by suggesting that Batman Forever and Batman and Robin are set in sort of an alternate timeline, but let's be real, at the time those movies came out, I don't think the filmmakers were really thinking that deeply behind it. Now, this series was written by Sam Hamm, who actually wrote the 89 Batman, as well as Batman Returns. And the comic was illustrated by Joe Quinones. I probably butchered his name, but he was the one who actually originally pitched the idea of doing a comic set within the Tim Burton Batman universe. Now, I just want to give fair warning, I read this comic a few weeks ago, and while I remember most of it, I am basing a lot of this review on memory, and if I get some things wrong, I do apologize. But the plot of Batman 89 is it's set sometime after the events of Batman Returns, once again disregarding Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. But basically, in the story, there's sort of a gang war developing between this gang inspired by the Joker and this gang inspired by Batman, and Gotham's district attorney Harvey Dent blames Batman for this violence, and he is now vowed to take down the vigilante. Now, a lot of the comic focuses on this predominantly black neighborhood in Gotham City called Burnside, and we follow this young mechanic named Drake Winson, who it turns out has become a vigilante himself, defending his neighborhood. But in the beginning of the comic, Batman makes a pretty horrible mistake that sort of inadvertently gets a little girl's older brother who was taking care of her killed, essentially orphaning this little girl. So Batman, or Bruce Wayne, feels tremendous guilt over this, and as Bruce Wayne, he tries to make amends for this by helping this community in ways that Batman can't. We also follow Harvey Dent, who is from Burnside, and he's trying to help his old community as well, but you also kind of get the idea that he is trying to get these people on his side to help his political career. But what happens is Drake stops this robbery about to be committed by some of these Batman-inspired criminals, and they retaliate by tracking him down to the auto shop where he works and set the place on fire with him inside. So Dent comes across this and tries to save Drake, but ultimately gets half of his face severely burned. So this, coupled with stresses he was already dealing with and some eternalized guilt, basically drives him completely insane, and he develops sort of a split personality, and he escapes from the hospital and ends up committing crimes. Specifically, he steals a large sum of money to give to his old neighborhood as sort of a twisted Robin Hood-like figure. And as Two-Face, he also tries to take on these corrupt politicians in Gotham City, which is not a bad thing, but the way he does it ultimately gets people killed. So now Batman has to stop Harvey Dent, or Two-Face. Now, I know Batman 89 got some mixed reviews, and there are certain aspects of this where I can understand why some people didn't like it, but I actually really enjoyed this comic, and one of the things I really enjoyed about this is it does serve as a sequel to the Tim Burton Batman films, and it pays tribute to those movies, but at the same time, it's not slavishly devoted to them. Like, the comic manages to have an identity of its own, and it expands upon the Tim Burton Batman universe, but also kinda grounds it to a certain degree, and adds a certain level of realism to it that wasn't really present in the two Tim Burton movies. Because this comic is actually very political. There's a lot of stuff in this about racism and class issues, and you can tell this was definitely written in sort of the wake of the George Floyd protests. And I know some people might have a problem with those kinds of politics getting interjected into a story like this, but for me it worked. Because the fact that Harvey Dent is black in this continuity, the comic actually plays into that. This idea that he's almost had to put on two different faces. One face for the people of Burnside, these people that he grew up with, and another face when he's working in the predominantly white-dominated world of politics. And this also creates these feelings of guilt, like, is he turning his back on this community that raised him? And I actually really liked that Sam Hamm took these issues of black identity and incorporated them into the character of Two-Face. Now, I just want to make a little correction. In my plot description of this, I called the Robin character Drake Wilson, but it's actually Drake Winston. But yeah, Drake Winston is basically this story's version of Robin. But I actually really liked the Drake Winston character, and the fact that Robin is a young black man in this is actually a reference to the fact that before Batman Forever came out, when Tim Burton was going to do his Batman 3, Robin was supposed to be played by Marlon Wayans. But I like that this is a completely original version of Robin. This isn't Dick Grayson or Tim Drake or Jason Todd. And I like that Drake Winston or Robin in this story is not really Batman's sidekick in this. He's kind of doing his own thing, and him and Batman, they do team up, but it's more of a partnership rather than a, like, teacher-slash-pupil or father-son relationship. Barbara Gordon also shows up in this comic, and this is a much older Barbara Gordon than most incarnations of the character. In this comic, Barbara Gordon is probably mid-30s, I would say, and she's actually a police sergeant, and she's engaged to Harvey Dent. And her and Harvey Dent actually have a pretty good relationship, which makes what happens all the more heartbreaking. Now, her father, Jim Gordon, does of course show up in the story, and this is where the comic does make a major deviation from the Tim Burton films, because the version of Jim Gordon in this comic is not really the same Jim Gordon that we saw Pat Hingle play. Like, this is much closer to the mainstream version of the character. You also see Selina Kyle, or Catwoman, come back in this, and it's the same version of the character that Michelle Pfeiffer played in Batman Returns. But her look is altered slightly, like it's sort of an amalgamation of how she looked in Batman Returns and how she looked in Batman the Animated Series. But you know what? Given how much time this is supposed to be set after Batman Returns, it makes sense that she would change her suit a little bit. Again, it shows that this comic is not slavishly devoted to those films. It's also interesting to see a Batman in this story that is kind of incompetent at times and does make some pretty tragic mistakes. So yeah, I recommend Batman 89. While it is doubtful that this is really what a third Tim Burton Batman movie would have been like had he made one in the mid-90s, on its own, it's still a really solid Batman story. And I like how this hardcover edition of Batman 89, when you take off the dust jacket, It looks like the old VHS for the 1989 Batman. But yeah, that was my review of Batman 89, and bye.